I was 20 years old at a time when everything inside me felt unfinished. I had a life that looked complete from the outside, routine days, familiar streets, a relationship people assumed was stable. But inside I carried a quiet restlessness I didn't know how to name. I smiled when I was opposed to, replied when spoken to, and followed plans that were already decided for me. Still, something in me felt like it was waiting. That was around the time I became close to him. He was 23, an African friend I had met through a casual connection that was never meant to become important. At first, he was just someone I talked to occasionally, someone whose presence felt calm rather than demanding. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words felt deliberate, as if he weighed them before letting them go. There was a steadiness about him that made silence comfortable instead of awkward. We were different in obvious ways, background, culture, the paths that brought us here. But there was also something quietly familiar between us. Conversations didn't feel forced. We talked about small things at first, daily routines, memories from childhood, places we had seen or wanted to see. Over time, those small things turned into longer pauses, shared laughs, and moments where neither of us rushed to fill the space. I didn't think of it as dangerous. At least, not then. At that point in my life, I was already committed to someone else. The relationship wasn't dramatic or broken. It was simply distant in ways that are hard to explain. We existed side by side, sharing time but not always sharing thoughts. I never spoke about that emptiness out loud. I told myself it was normal, that every relationship settles into quiet. Still, there were questions I avoided because I didn't want to know the answers. With him, those questions surfaced without being asked. The idea of leaving the city came up casually. It wasn't planned with intention, more like a thought spoken aloud and not taken back. A few days away, somewhere remote, no noise, no obligations, just space. The suggestion lingered between us longer than expected, and before I had fully considered the consequences, I agreed. We left early, when the city was still half asleep. As buildings gave way to open roads, I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. My phone lost signal little by little, and with it, the pull of the life I had temporarily stepped away from. I told myself it was only a short break. 3 days, nothing more. The jungle greeted us with a kind of quiet that wasn't empty but alive. Tall trees filtered the light, shadows moving gently as the wind passed through. The air felt heavier, slower, as if time itself had agreed to move differently there. We set up a simple place to stay, nothing elaborate, just enough to rest. There was no schedule, no one waiting for us. That freedom felt unfamiliar. The first day passed with light conversation and exploration. We walked, observed, listened. He pointed out small details I would have missed. The sound of birds I couldn't name, the way the ground changed underfoot, the rhythm of the place. I realized how rarely I paid attention like that in my normal life. At night, we sat near a small fire. The darkness around us felt deeper without city lights, but it wasn't frightening. It felt honest. The fire crackled softly, and for a while, neither of us spoke. I was aware of his presence beside me, not in a physical way, but in the way you sense someone's attention even when they're quiet. When he finally spoke, it wasn't about anything important, or maybe it was, and I just didn't recognize it yet. He talked about how places like this made him think more clearly, how distance helped him understand himself. I listened, feeling something shift inside me, a recognition I hadn't expected. I didn't talk about my relationship, not directly, but I spoke about feeling lost, about standing at the edge of decisions I wasn't ready to make. He didn't interrupt or advise. He just listened. That alone felt like more than I was used to. The second day began with an ease that surprised me. I woke up without the usual weight of expectations. We shared simple meals, walked without direction, rested when we felt like it. Conversations deepened naturally, moving from memories to fears, from jokes to confessions that felt safer in the open air. I noticed how often I looked to him when something caught my attention, how instinctive it felt. That realization unsettled me. I reminded myself of boundaries, of the life I would return to, but the thoughts came anyway, uninvited and persistent. Nothing physical happened. There was no single moment I could point to and say, this is where I cross a line. Instead, it was a series of small things. The way he understood what I meant before I finished speaking, the comfort of shared silence, the feeling of being seen without explanation. By the third day, the awareness was impossible to ignore. I was standing in a place far from home, emotionally closer to someone I wasn't supposed to be close to. The jungle around us felt like a witness, quiet, patient, indifferent to the rules I had brought with me. That evening, as the light faded and the familiar sounds returned, I felt a knot of emotion tighten in my chest. I knew that whatever this was, it couldn't remain undefined forever. Something had already changed, even if no one else could see it. As we sat there, the fire casting moving shadows, I understood that the journey wasn't really about the jungle or the days away. It was about confronting parts of myself I had avoided for too long. And as I looked into the darkness beyond the firelight, I realized that when I returned, I would not be the same person who had left. The third morning arrived quietly, almost cautiously, as if the jungle itself was aware that something fragile was unfolding between us. I woke before him and stepped outside, letting the cool air settle against my skin. The sounds around me felt closer now, familiar rather than foreign. In just a few days, this place had begun to feel like a pause from reality, a space where truth surfaced without resistance. When he joined me, we didn't greet each other with words. We didn't need to. There was an understanding that had formed, unspoken but present, like the ground beneath our feet. We shared breakfast in silence, not uncomfortable, but heavy with thoughts neither of us voiced. As the day unfolded, we walked deeper into the jungle, following no particular path. The canopy above filtered the sunlight into fragments, and I found myself thinking about how life outside worked the same way, never revealing everything at once, only pieces, depending on where you stood. With each step, I felt further from the person I had been before coming here. We talked more openly that day. He spoke about his past, about moving through places where he never fully belonged, about learning to read people rather than rely on promises. There was no bitterness in his voice, only honesty. When he asked about me, really asked, I hesitated. The truth felt dangerous, but keeping it inside felt worse. I told him I felt divided, that I was living a life shaped by expectations I hadn't chosen myself. I admitted I was afraid of disappointing people, afraid of naming feelings that didn't fit neatly into the story others knew about me. Saying out loud made it real in a way it had never been before. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he slowed his steps, then stopped entirely. He looked at me, not with judgment, not with curiosity, but with something gentler, something that felt like recognition. He told me that sometimes betrayal begins long before any action, in the moment we stop being honest with ourselves. His words stayed with me, echoing louder than the sound of the jungle. That night, the tension between us felt different. It wasn't charged with anticipation as much as it was with restraint. We were both aware of the line. We were standing near. Every movement felt deliberate, every pause intentional. I noticed how carefully we chose where to sit, how we kept a respectful distance that said more than closeness ever could. Inside me, the conflict grew sharper. I thought about the person waiting for me back home, unaware of how far my heart had traveled in just a few days. I felt guilt, not the dramatic kind that demands confession, but the quiet kind that settles deep and stays. And yet, alongside it, there was clarity. For the first time, I wasn't confused about what I felt. I was only confused about what to do with it. Late into the night, we spoke about identity. Not labels, not definitions, but the slow process of understanding who you are when no one is watching. He said something that stayed with me long after. That love, in its truest form, asks for honesty first, even when it costs you comfort. I realized how often I had chosen comfort instead. I didn't sleep much. Thoughts came and went, each one heavier than the last. I knew that whatever happened next, I couldn't pretend this was just a trip or a fleeting connection. Emotional boundaries had already shifted. Something intimate had formed, even without touch. On the final morning, the jungle felt quieter, as if holding its breath. We packed our things slowly. There was no rush, but there was an understanding that time was no longer on our side. I felt an urge to say something definitive, to name what this had been, but the words refused to come. As we prepared to leave, I looked at him and saw not temptation, but truth, and that realization frightened me more than desire ever could, because truth demands consequences, and I was standing at the edge of choices I could no longer avoid. The journey back would take us out of the jungle, back into noise, back into roles and expectations. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my chest, that the real journey, the one that had begun here, was far from over. The road back felt longer than the journey in, as the jungle slowly released us. Giving way to familiar signs of civilization, I felt a strange sense of loss settle in my chest. It wasn't just a place I was leaving behind. It was a version of myself that had existed there, unfiltered, uncertain, but honest in a way I had never allowed before. We didn't talk much during the return. It wasn't because there was nothing left to say, but because everything felt too heavy to fit into words. Every now and then, our eyes met briefly, and in those moments, entire conversations passed between us. Questions, apologies, gratitude, restraint. I wondered if he felt the same weight I did, or if he had learned long ago how to carry such things more easily. When we reached the city, noise rushed back in all at once. Cars, voices, movement. Life resumed without asking whether I was ready. The jungle already felt distant, like a dream that fades the moment you wake. Except this one left a mark. We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving, as if stepping away would make everything final. He was the first to speak. His voice was calm, steady, but there was a softness in it I hadn't noticed before. He said that some connections are meant to change us, not stay with us. That sometimes honesty means knowing when to let go. I nodded, even though part of me wanted to argue, to delay the inevitable with more words, more time. We parted without promises. No dramatic goodbye. No declarations. Just a quiet understanding that whatever had passed between us belonged to those 3 days and the truths they revealed. As I watched him walk away, I felt something inside me close, not out of fear, but out of acceptance. Returning to my old life was harder than I expected. Familiar rooms felt smaller. Conversations felt louder, but less meaningful. The person I was in a relationship would notice something was different, even if they couldn't name it. I was more distant, more thoughtful, not because I was hiding something, but because I was processing everything at once. Guilt surfaced in unexpected ways. It wasn't about what I had done, but about what I had felt. Emotional infidelity doesn't leave visible marks, but it changes the way you see yourself. I questioned whether love could exist without honesty, whether staying silent was a form of kindness or cowardice. The answers didn't come easily. I thought often about the jungle, not as a place, but as a moment, a pause in my life where I had been forced to confront who I was becoming. I realized that I had been living in fragments, choosing what was easiest rather than what was true. The connection I had experienced wasn't something I could undo or forget, but it also wasn't something I wanted to repeat at the cost of someone else's trust. Eventually, I made a decision, not sudden, not dramatic, but necessary. I chose honesty, not the kind that reveals everything at once, but the kind that begins with yourself. I acknowledged the parts of me I had ignored, the questions I had buried, the identity I had been too afraid to explore. It was painful and it took time, but it was real. I never saw him again after that. We didn't stay in touch. There were no late messages or secret calls. And somehow that felt right. What we shared didn't need continuation to be meaningful. It had already done what it was meant to do. Looking back now, I don't see those days as a mistake. I see them as a mirror. They showed me the cost of emotional distance and the danger of living without self-awareness. Infidelity isn't always about betrayal in action. Sometimes it's about betraying your own truth long before anyone else's. I learned that love demands responsibility, not just to others, but to yourself. That understanding who you are is not optional if you want to live honestly, and that some people enter your life not to stay, but to awaken something you can no longer ignore. I was 20 years old when I went into the jungle thinking I was just taking a trip. I came back knowing that silence can be louder than confession, that restraint can be as powerful as desire, and that growth often begins in the most unexpected places. Some stories don't end with togetherness. Some end with clarity. And sometimes that is the most honest ending of all.